but we have a good presentation for you. So it'll probably be on our website after we get done. Welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Michael. We've got Kyle and Eric also presenting today. Thanks for joining us for Design Basics. Yeah, away we go, I guess.
Do you want the next slide?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, there. I have
all right
windows open on mine. That's why.
All right. So some basic concepts of design for you guys. The focal point is what everybody talks about, obviously, but you can't have a good focal point without kind of framing your view. We're going to be going over pictures, so hopefully I'll be able to make this make a little bit more sense. But framing is going to be your larger items, particularly small to large size trees on either side of your landscaping or either side of your house. That's going to help narrow the view and kind of give you a sense of place with the surrounding environment as well. Then the focal point, generally for front yard landscapes, which is primarily what we're talking about today, is directing your eye. And directing your eye usually almost always goes to the front door. But depending on the path of travel, you might have multiple focal points on the path of travel up to the front door as well. So these are some of the things that we're going to be looking at, and then we're going to talk about some of the connecting ideas as well. So that would be reusing same colors or even same plants in multiple spots, so that you can kind of get a little bit of repetition, and it kind of helps the design flow that way. You want to hit the next slide?
Yep.
All right. So a basic design. As you can see, you've got some larger items on either side of the house. That kind of helps with the framing. That's that framing that I was just talking about. So you've got an ornamental tree on the left side, and then we've got an even smaller ornamental tree on the right side, on the opposite side of the garage there. I suppose not many people have single car driveways anymore, but nonetheless, when you guys don't have customers, we have customers. When you have visitors or guests coming over to your house, they're probably going to park on your driveway. So as they're getting out of your car, their car, you want to kind of eyeball what it's looking like. So we highlight with brighter plants towards the front door, kind of helping them focus on where they're going. And then you'll see some of the repetition. The connecting plants are the little spiky ones there behind the bench and out in the front bed along the sidewalk edge there. We can probably move to the next one, Kyle. And again, you have larger plants on either side of the house to kind of anchor it to your surroundings. It gives you that sense of place and kind of helps frame in the house so that it kind of adds to the aesthetic of the house as opposed to blocking it. So we have some pictures of houses with large items that are kind of blocking the house, and those are kind of things that you would look to avoid. Again, you got a long line of the connecting plants, and then if you look underneath the framing plants, there's actually a repetition of some of those plants on the left side of the driveway, as there was on the right side as well. Yeah, again, we do a lot with just drawing the eye towards the front door where you want the people to walk to, where you want your guests to walk to. So yeah, hit the next slide. Again, you want to make sure that you're approaching it from different views. So you want to get step back and do some of the street view. So you kind of, if you're approaching the house, and then you also want to take a look at when they're getting out of their car. So you take a look from middle of your driveway. What are they seeing as they're walking up? Do you have a really long walkway to your front door? Because then you're going to need multiple focal points along that long walkway, especially if it goes around to the other side of the house. If you have a driveway on one side and a front door on the other, you're going to need to use several focal points along the way in order to get them going. And of course, you know, with your focal points, they don't all have to be plants. You can use things like bird baths. You can use other high color items, or just things that are going to look good in a lot of the year. Other things to keep in mind, of course, is do you use the windows in your house to look out? Like, so you don't want to put something big just because it helps with the design on the outside and then end up blocking your view from inside your house. So you want to be a little careful with what's going around, what's going in front of windows and other doorways, things like that. And then another, if you want to go back just one second. Then the third thing is, and we use the framing plants a lot for this, but that are there views that you want to hide? A lot of times, as much as we like our neighborhoods, they're not always, you know, your neighbors don't agree with your aesthetic taste, and sometimes they like to keep their trash cans out on the side of their house, or, you know, that kind of thing, or just it's a big blank wall, and you know, a big blank wall is not really the most eye-catching thing or appealing thing to look at. So we're gonna cover how to help with some of those situations as well. You can move to the next slide. Sorry, I just skipped that one. And again, I probably, so here's my more overview of the design, and it is the same picture from before. Again, you've got the connecting shrubs kind of repeated in front of the sidewalk, and then again underneath the framing on the left side. And again, repetition kind of just helps your mind comprehend what you're seeing, and it keeps it from feeling overwhelming. So you don't want to use 20 different individual plants in your landscape design, because it's going to be busy and it's going to make it more visually just quite intrusive, I guess would be a good word. It kind of you know, so you know, Eric and Kyle and I and Becca, we can all probably admit to doing some of that because we're plant people and we love plants, and so we want to try one of everything. But if you're focusing on design, using some more repetition isn't a bad thing, and definitely something to keep in mind.
I guess that's next slide. Do you want the other one back?
Let's do next slide. There we go. Again, so generic house, hopefully nobody in the presentation, this is their house, generic house. And you can see, you know, they went for a framing plant. The framing plant was not well balanced in this case, you know, so it's very heavy on the right side because of that giant spruce tree. I think that they could use some additional framing on the left side as well, in order to kind of conceal the shed in the backyard there, or if it's the neighbor's shed, or the neighbor's house there. Definitely could have used something, even if it wasn't a full as big as the spruce tree, something mid house level or even as tall as the house would have been nice there. Something like a magnolia or serviceberry would give you that kind of size. And although this is obviously a winter picture because the trees don't have any leaves on it, you would still have a little bit more form and shape from the trunk of a multi-stem tree there that would kind of help obscure the shed and the neighbor house on that left side.
I think also the hedge in front of the front door is starting to block the view of the front door from the street.
It is very much so. It looks like they're building a fort behind the shrubs there, the yews.
So it keeping in mind mature size of some things. It helps for when you're planting under windows. If it's something that's going to end up being 8 feet tall on its own and your window is only 4 feet off the ground, you're going to have to be doing pruning on that all the time. But if we select things that maybe top out at 3 or 4 feet, it's not going to block the view from the window.
And you're not going to have to work at it to keep it
Yeah.
underneath the window. So we do a lot with right plant, right place. That I'm sure if you've been around with us before, you've heard that before. So we do, we want to try and guide you to something that's going to be better. So turns out those are actually arborvitaes. You'd think I would have remembered that from seeing these slides before, but those are arborvitaes in the front there. And again, I would say that they're, you would have wanted something a little lower in front of the sidewalk, in front of the walkway there, because you want people to feel like they can approach your house. So you want a little something lower. Alliums, coral bells. There's even some small shrubs like weigela, things like that, that could go in that spot and not become overwhelming and create that wall.
I think, Michael, I think you can see how they're shearing them too, and they're getting real leggy at the base, and they're at the point they need to be replaced anyways. But that's why when you plant something too big for a spot like that and you try to adjust and prune it, you eventually ruin the aesthetic value of the plant itself. So that's something you really consider when you're planting close to the walk like that. What size is the ultimate size, and is it going to be too big for that spot? And you can work on it for a little bit, but it all depends on the plant you choose.
And one thing that we'll recommend a lot is larger bed sizes. I think that's in one of our later slides, so I don't have to hit on it too much right now. But a lot of people like to just do a little 2-foot strip along their base of their house, or a little 2-foot strip next to their sidewalk. And unless you're sticking with small annuals and some perennials, it's just not enough space for most plantings. You need a little bit more space than that. You want to go to the next slide?
Yep.
I think one thing we're noticing is that there's kind of a lack of focal points still here. Obviously, where your eye naturally goes is kind of that corner, and they have an urn there, so clearly they've thought of putting something there. Since this is a winter picture, this might have been something that, having some sprigs of evergreen that were in there in the urn to kind of keep your eye interested and going towards the front door. We can go to the next slide too, which is the hallway of arborvitae there. And again, because they made that arborvitae wall around the sidewalk, there's nothing much more to look at.
Also with the hallway effect of that, since we've all experienced so much snow recently, it would be difficult with an evergreen, in particular hedge, right up against the sidewalk. You'd have to use your shovel to lift that snow up and over the evergreens. Just another consideration with that.
And with 2 feet of snow, that's not sounding like fun.
Right.
The note on this slide was, obviously to balance with the size of your house and also the neighbors' houses as well. It's possible that this is just an immature landscape, freshly planted. But judging by how close they planted that shrub on the corner of the house, it shouldn't get too much bigger because it's already pretty close to the corner of the house. So it's never going to give you a good amount in proportion to the massive amount of wall that you're looking at the neighbor's house.
A complete contrast to the previous house that had the very large evergreen on the right side. If we did change angles and we were more at the street, looking straight at the front door, the tree that's in the left may kind of help with some of that.
It would absolutely. And so as a straight on shot, it would definitely help with that. But you could also have moved that tree slightly backwards and kind of kept it in and incorporated more into the bed, and you'd have more of a balanced effect from multiple views then. So I'm not promoting planting trees right next to your house. That's definitely not what I'm promoting. We don't like that. But an appropriate distance away from your house could give you a good balanced effect from both the street and as you're approaching the house. And perhaps also provide some screening from your neighbors so that you're not looking at necessarily their house when, or your guests aren't looking at their house when they're approaching yours. Again, this is customer submission. This is where we got quite a few of these photos is from customer submissions, and this was a concern for them that as they're walking up their sidewalk, and you can't see the bottom of the picture, but the bottom of the picture is their sidewalk that's leading up to their front door, and this is what they had to look at. You go to the next slide. We have a couple bubble drawings about what you could put there. So keep in mind, we're not advocating planting on your neighbor's property. This is, just perspective. But you can put up a trellis with a vine that grows on it. You could even make it into a little sitting area if you wanted to put large flagstones down, stuff like that. But it doesn't have to be just the opening. Was there another one on the next slide, if I remember right too? Yeah, there you go, a little seating area. So obviously you're working within your property line, but you can give yourself another focal point, as this is a curved path up to the front door. So as you're walking up to the front door, you have to actually lose sight of the front door because you have to go around the garage or that kind of thing. So yeah, as far as that the doodle drawings would be, you'd kind of keep it a little bit close to the your own house. Obviously, the doodle drawings were not against the neighbor's house; they would be on your property still. Again, I can't stress it enough how important it is not to hide your front door. Oh, Becca, you want to do questions? Did you see other ones?
Got it.
There
was a question about was that next to the house? I'm assuming that meant in, let me go back.
Yeah.
Maybe. So both of these options, they're actually in your yard if this is your front walk that we're in, the neighbor's house being that kind of beige one. So you're not really planting in their yard unless they wanted to collaborate with you and do something together.
That's true.
So this would be in the side yard of the person that owns the property that we're looking at.
It's on the side / in front of their house still somewhat. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to hide your front door, then you can plant large trees directly in line with your front door. But also then the U's on this one. You'll notice, I think we have multiple pictures of this one. As soon as you change angle, you can't see that front door at all because of how big the evergreens are that are next to the house.
That was that one. Do you want it still up?
I think even the color of the front door kind of blends in with the house.
That's true,
so
too.
It's very, very difficult to see because they got that brown that kind of blends in. So even just changing the color of the front door a little bit might make it more of a focal point, but the shrubs are definitely going to block it.
Particularly the shrubs on either side of the front door. If those were not there, the other stuff looks fairly balanced. And
yeah, absolutely.
But, the other two I think have just grown, and it might have been one of those where they were allowed to get to a certain size before they really started pruning them, and you can't prune them much smaller at a certain point.
No, as Eric pointed out that on the arborvitae picture, the last one, if you let it get too big, pruning it back down becomes near impossible. So focal points, they're the obvious thing that you are in the area. It's what your eye should be drawn to. Usually it's colorful. And they can change from different viewpoints. But again, you want to make sure that there's stuff that you want to look at throughout most of the season too. So if you're picking out something that only flowers for a week as a focal point, then you have to know that the leaf color is still nice to look at. You know, you have other attributes that you're interested in utilizing as your focal point. So another one. So there's a great example of how the focal point can actually move. So this would be more towards fall, and you've got that tree lined up, and it's that bright golden yellow, which again, probably just in the fall time, but it's a perfect focal point. You'll notice underneath in the tree has the bright yellow grasses, which will be there throughout the summer. So as you can highlight the tree a little bit more in the fall, you still have a nice focal point down that pathway to invite you to walk down it with the yellow grasses as well. What slide are we on, Kyle?
This one I think might be your last one.
This one? Okay.
With the focal point.
All right. So again, how I've been stressing how your focal point actually moves as you're heading along the journey to the front door. Again, with front yard design, it's all about the journey to the front door, getting your guests to your house in a pleasant way. You know, so this one has multiple focal points. Number 2 would be an initial focal point from getting out of the car, and then number 3 is a planter by the front door as well. So it kind of keeps people moving as their journey leads to the front door.
Hang on just 1 second. I need to admit these people.
Oh, we got more people to admit.
Yeah.
Good.
And they popped up at the same time, and it blocked me here. Okay. And number 1 in that picture would be your framing plants on either side of the house.
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Kyle. And then there are connecting plants labeled as well underneath those. And in this case, nice walkway. You've got that bright red, the red bird bath there. So it kind of makes you want to head that way. Gives you something to pull your attention that way as you're walking. And actually directly behind it is a magnolia tree as well. So when the magnolia is flowering, it's going to be magnificent to go that way.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. And now I'm going to do some of the presentation here. So we're looking at symmetry, and some people are very balanced, and which tends to be a more formal look like what's on the bottom left, or more of a informal look on the bottom right. They are balanced, but it's asymmetrical. So you're kind of balancing things out with the different weights.
Visual weight, yeah.
Yeah, visually. So the house on the left, the house by itself without any plantings, is pretty much balanced on its own, just very symmetrical. Everything's even. It's a mirror image on the left and right of the front door.
And certain houses obviously lend themselves to this a lot easier than others.
Yeah. Okay. And then also just looking at the lines, too many strong lines can be a little overwhelming. So this one, you've got the roof line with the gutters, the overhangs, the windows, and then they went with a very formal hedge, again, kind of creating that hallway, and then even just the vertical of the trees. So this one might be ideal to do a little bit of softening. But we'll continue on. Again, another one, just the house is somewhat formal and very symmetrical, and there's a lot of straight lines going on, which may appeal to some people. It may not to others. So again, we're going to talk about personal styles being something, and there's somebody in chat here. Can we go back to the last slide of the last presentation at some time?
I think that was the bird bath one, and then I mentioned that there was a nice magnolia behind it, I think is what we're looking at.
You want me to jump back to that real quick?
Sure.
As long as we're here, it's going to be easier at this point then. There we go. That should be the slide.
I believe so. So the tree across the walkway that leads up to the front porch is actually a magnolia, and that one actually in this picture has already flowered as the leaves are coming out now. But it's kind of got that gray bark and it's kind of got a little bit of wavy branch to it. And that's the far tree. And so that one was what I was thinking. I think that's what you're referring to.
And by the bird bath there's the Fothergillas that are flowering now.
True.
And,
yeah.
The Fothergillas will also have the really good fall color too, which adds to the bird bath there in that area.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
It's, you look for focal plants to be multi-seasonal. Fothergill is a great one because it has such a nice form, good leaf, flowers in the spring, and the good fall color.
Didn't mean to advance the slide there, sorry. Depends
And
on where I click on the screen. Just for reference, this is the front facing portion of somebody's house. The front door is all the way on the left. You can see just the edge of a wooden rocker that is on the front porch. So that window that's just off center is facing the front. So you would approach from on the bricks kind of at the bottom of the picture, and then you'd kind of go to the left, and that's going up to the front door.
yeah, this is from the driveway view basically. And this is in this instance, I can point out, the magnolia looks to me to be kind of in front of that window. And that's one of those instances where they didn't mind having some screening for that window. The multi-stem next to the bird bath, Kyle, do you remember?
I'm thinking that's a serviceberry.
It looks like a serviceberry trunk to me. Yeah, absolutely.
There's also, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the connector plants, but you can see the boxwoods on both sides of the walk. It kind of draws
some in the foreground there. Yeah, very much so. In the foreground, there's some boxwoods as well as on the opposite side of the path to the door, on the far side of the path to the door in front of the magnolia tree there as well.
Okay, good to move on.
There's a question about suggestions for height and color for a house that faces north.
For height and color, looking at plants, you could do, there are evergreens, of course. Yews can take quite a bit of shade. If you wanted more color, sometimes for bold color, annuals are going to provide your best color. But also choosing containers that might have some color in the container itself, a nice glazed container. And then there are perennials like hosta that have some bright foliage depending on the variety. And you can get a range of sizes. Some of the hostas, like some in substance, are quite large, so they're almost shrub-like in size. But do remember, they're going to go dormant over the winter, so it's going to leave a void there. So if it's a foundation planting, there may be a portion that you're going to see right up to the house at that point, which may be okay.
What vines would you use with a climbing rose on the northeast side of the house?
You can mix clematis in, just choose one that's not super aggressive, like Sweet Autumn would be pretty aggressive. So one of the smaller clematises might work just fine. Okay, jump back, we're looking at lines. And then this one, kind of a good recipe is 1/3 evergreen, 2/3 deciduous for year-round interest. Right now, this house would still have year-round interest even with the snow. The evergreens are still taller than what snow we have, although in this particular shot, it looks like it's fairly heavy on evergreen. I think the large shrub in the left in front of what looks like maybe the garage, that might be deciduous where it's going to lose its foliage and you'll just have the bare stems over the winter. But the rest of this does look like it's a little bit heavy on evergreens, particularly of the same green tones.
Yeah.
Later in the presentation, I think Eric is going to mention Chamaecyparis mops, the mops gold or false gold cypress that has yellow color for the winter and the rest of the year. So there are evergreens that are not just green. So mixing up the colors, there are some blues and other things that might kind of mix this up a bit. Come on, slide. Apparently PowerPoint is stuck. There we go. This is one where they've had kind of a nice evergreen hedge. It looks like yews over here. And they have started to creep up over the bottom of the window, which may not be a horrible thing, but the rest of this area looks like they're kind of looking towards planting something new leading up to the front door. The grass has died out. It looks like maybe even it's a new sidewalk. So at that point, you'd have to decide if you wanted to keep the evergreen hedge or remove it and start fresh, which may be kind of nice just to have everything on the same page.
One thing I want to mention, Kyle,
Mhm.
is if you're getting your sidewalk replaced like this, it's an older house, people get your sidewalks replaced, but look at the downspout. If they
Oh,
left
that's
that
very true.
downspout without it going underneath the sidewalk out into the yard, it's going to flood that area. The water is going to spill onto your sidewalk or your driveway and cause issues. What they did here was they buried it, put it underneath the sidewalk, and it goes out into the yard in like a pop-up drain.
Yeah, this
Which
actually
is
has
a really good thing to think about when you're redoing something. Think about where the water flow is going to go, because that could cause issues for the plants in that area, let alone in the winter. Where is the water going to go? It's going to go onto the sidewalk. It's going to make it icy, or your driveway.
Yeah. This one looks like they have a little outlet there in
Yep.
the right, a little green disc there.
You
So
have
it's
these little
over-
pop-up outlets that go out in the grass and you don't even see them. They just pop
Hmm.
up when the water comes out and they go back, and you can mow over them. It's really a nice thing to put out in the yard, and then it waters your lawn too.
And I've even done it at my house with the perforated pipe and just buried a couple sections of the perforated pipe at the end. So it just kind of seeps out under the lawn. Oops, trying to get the next slide again. There we go. So think about your personal style. We were just talking about the style of the house, which is one thing. It's a little bit harder to change the actual design of the house. You can incorporate more of a formal design in front of an informal look house, or you can mix it up however you really want. So this is taking the landscape and kind of making it your own outside of the style of the house. So that last slide was a formal planting. Let me just go back to it, maybe. Where the hostas in the left photo are kind of in front of the daylilies. So they've got a uniform line of the variegated hosta. And in the picture on the right, they've got the clipped boxwoods, making a nice kind of line. You can also use this with informal plantings behind it. If you want to add kind of a nice border, you can do a planting of the same plant around it and then kind of have a more chaotic look behind that.
Kyle, I have a question about what you would plant in a curved bed close to your house. Perennials, hydrangeas, or just annuals.
Is that in,
It's Audrey would. How deep is the bed? Do we have any? Do you have your recommendations for depth of bed for success?
If it's at least a 6-foot bed, or even maybe a 4-foot bed, you can do one of the smaller sized hydrangeas, which are much more multi-seasonal. The annuals would be kind of single season. So for that quick fix, annuals are good. And then you could mix in some perennials. But some perennials are going to have more winter interest than others. The slide that is up right now on the screen does not look like this today. This was January 9th of 2012, but those are mostly perennials in that picture. And it's showing more of an informal design. Now this is a backyard, but curved lines, but it's repetitive plant shapes and plants. So we've got the little blue stem in the foreground and similar looking textures throughout, just to kind of pull it all together.
Like it could use a few evergreens in there.
It could. Actually, there is a Mr. Bowling Ball on the left that right now is much bigger.
so Audrey was trying to refer to the inside of the sidewalk picture, if you want to go
Oh,
back, Kyle.
you want me to go back?
I know we have another slide dealing with that kind of tricky spot later in the presentation. But that's what Audrey was hoping to talk about.
This
was
one right there. So
yes.
typically with that, you're going to have a solid pipe coming off of the downspout. So you're going to have solid pipe coming off. So it's not really going to be adding much moisture right there in that particular section of bed. you would have the outlet over in the lawn or perforated pipe under the lawn or other garden areas farther out. So it's not necessarily allowing water just to fill up right there at the base of the downspout. Because like Eric mentioned, if the ground's frozen and it starts to overflow, that water is going to come off and go over your sidewalk or down the driveway and create a really leaky spot.
Audrey was actually looking for plant suggestions for in that.
Oh, in that area.
In that area, yes.
That might be a little bit small for, can you get one of the smallest hydrangeas in there?
Yeah, you could do, we got some of the smaller, there's one called Wee White, which is a white hydrangea. You could use probably a Summer Crush, which is the macrophylla that have the more red color to it. You could even do you probably have enough space for a Fothergilla along with some maybe coral bells or hostas along there in the front.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to tell. It looks like it's maybe 3-4 feet. It obviously needs some soil in it to fill it up a little bit, but you could certainly do a shrub and maybe some small perennials or maybe a couple of little shrubs along with some perennials to give it color. And depending on the exposure, it's kind of hard to tell. It looks like it's a lot of shade, so you're going to have to stick with some of the shrubs that tolerate more shade. You know, the evergreens, you can do the boxwoods, but then to pull a little color in, you're going to have to go to the perennials probably for a little color. And a lot of times people look for, you know, like the purples and stuff, the colors. You know, when you put the purple colors in the shade, they tend to fade really quickly. Mm-hmm. So you start out with a kind of a purplish color in the spring when the new foliage comes out, and as the season goes on, it fades to kind of a greenish. So you really don't end up with in the shade that purple color. But some of the perennials do hold their color a little better, like the coral bells. Obviously, the hostas are going to have the variegated, and there's so many different varieties of hostas that have the different textures and colors that would work well.
And with this particular picture, I would probably pull the bed line out. There really isn't anything on the front side of the sidewalk other than, you know, just a few inches of soil. You could easily create that bed to come all the way down to the driveway in front of the sidewalk or come off of the sidewalk. So you could repeat some of that, whatever shrub you're using on the left by the house on the right side as well, and the perennials.
If they're particularly narrow beds, and we do have a slide about the skinny areas next to sidewalks later in the presentation, but the skinnier they get, the harder it is to grow things in those little spots because the soil volume turns to more rock from the base of the foundation and also from the sidewalk pouring, and it just loses the quality of soil that can be in there, and it also just is sometimes overlapped by the overhang of the house, so it can be very dry. So some of the tougher plants that can really tolerate those spots would be like the grasses, things like that. So especially on a west side or, you know, well, there's grasses that can go in any situation, but they're very tough and they can take those poor soil conditions too.
Okay, so I'm going to pull it back to, we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left. So just to quickly go through some of this, we've talked about unity with repeating colors to make connecting plants. That can be, again, with similar colors. Doesn't have to be the exact same plant, but similar tones, similar shapes, like the hydrangea up at the top, the boxwood, the evergreen at the top left. And you can also echo colors, whether it's with a container, the foliage color, the shutters on the house, the front door of the house, trim of the house, just to tie everything together. Next slide, come on. There we go. So this image is kind of highlighting the connecting plants. We saw a similar one earlier where the framing plants are the large plants on either side of the house. The focal point is one of those in front of the sidewalk or next to the sidewalk by the front door. The connecting plants are kind of lower key supporting role type plants. They may not be as flashy, but they're good for filling in and just providing unity and kind of pulling the whole design together. And planting in odd numbers, unless you're doing a very formal layout in a straight line, plant in odd numbers. That's usually best. It looks a little more natural, and they don't have to be in exact triangles, kind of loosely play with things. I like to look at things as I'm setting them out, both from the garden end or if I'm seeing them from the patio or deck, but then also go to a few key windows, look out of them if that's where you're going to also see that particular spot from, and just see how it looks before you plant it. And color, not just the house, but you've got siding, roof, shutters, the front door, and then you can tie that in or contrast it, build off of it, however you want to work with it, with your containers and your plants, both the foliage color and the flower color. So here's just an example of various front doors. The one on the top right, you can see they kind of echoed the color of the door with the, what I'm going to guess is a hanging basket on a stand, but just a container of petunias in that case.
Yeah, that's really cute.
And then texture, whether it's kind of shiny, if it's a bold texture like the hosta on the left where it's kind of a big leaf, or a fine texture with that grass that's immediately to the right of the hosta in the left photo, which also is draping. So you've got different textures and shapes to play with here. And then 4-season interest. Right now, in the middle of February, this is really important because we do have at least 5 months of winter here. Plants that are going to add structure and look good throughout the year, even when they don't have foliage on them. That may not just be evergreens. In this photo, on the left, we have the gold mops Chamaecyparis, or the false cypress mops. That is the yellow evergreen. There's 4 of them or 5 of them there in that picture. There is the upright green evergreen, probably a spruce. The browns are ornamental grasses. Those are perennials that are going to end up getting trimmed to the ground. And right in the front, that is a Siberian iris, which still has some nice winter structure to it and a different brown tone than even the grasses have. So they can be used as great 4-season plants.
So to just add to this, Kyle, you know, a lot of people call and ask whether they should prune everything down in the fall. But look what this picture would look like if everything was cut down, the grasses, the perennials. You'd be missing a lot of winter interest right now with everything cut down in the fall. I just wait till, usually mid-spring or something before I take and clean out all my gardens, cut my grasses back, because you got that all winter to look at.
And certain things like the iris have nice seed heads. So those weren't even deadheaded. They were left up for winter interest even when they were done blooming in June. And balance. Oh.
Kyle, we had a question about vines for a metal structure from Dennis. I didn't know if he was a sunny or shady spot, but I don't know if you had like 1 or 2 for each.
Oops, hang on. I'm just trying to bring the chat up. For a metal structure, if you're looking for quick coverage, the quickest growing vines we have would be in the annual department, like morning glories, and those tend to reseed as long as you're not using a pre-emergent like preen or something to stop them from coming back the next year. But the annual vines give you the quickest coverage. Then we've got clematis that are kind of a lighter weight vine that come back every year. There are some other perennial vines that tend to get a little more woody. So depending on how strong the metal structure is, the Lonicera or honeysuckle, wisteria, things like that, those do need a more solid support. So over time, those could start pulling it down if it's a thinner metal, but if it's a substantial metal trellis, you could use that. And as you go into more shade, there are a few clematis that can take some shade. They don't necessarily bloom quite as well. But then also the Boston ivy and Virginia creeper, which tend to be just kind of green, but quite often have some nice fall color. Those work well. Okay, and then balance. We're basically using larger trees and shrubs. I'm going to just go to the next slide here because you can kind of see it better. We've got the formal balance. We've got the large tree in the center, and then we have smaller shrubs on either side of it, kind of just keeping it very balanced visually with on the center there. And then on the bottom, the larger tree and larger shrub to the right, we've only got one of each, but on the left, we've got multiples of that medium-sized shrub so that it's still kind of balancing it out if you were to put it on a scale. Okay, and now I think it's on to Eric.
Yes. Noticing the large framing trees opposite the garage to balance this. And it really depends on the landscape or the architecture of the house too, a little bit, to kind of, when you're framing, you not only have to think about the architecture of the house and how, if it's a 2-story house or just a single-story house, but the size of the plants you're going to use and the ultimate size of those plants. Notice on the one on the left is a little bit, it's going to be a bigger shrub. It's going to help balance that house because there's more of the house on the left, obviously, than on the right. So you're going to use a little bit bigger plants according to basically the scale of your house. You can go to the next slide.
Okay. Neat. We have the chat open. There we go.
Here's, again, this is more scale. You can kind of see how they really block the front door here with these larger evergreens. I know when they first planted them, a lot of people had the intention of, they look so cute in the pot and all these look so nice up against the house like that. But, you know, a lot of people don't anticipate the growth of the plants and how they will overwhelm as they get bigger. And I can see that the yews have been trimmed somewhat, but it really just hides the whole front of the house when you get something that's out of scale with the house. And that really throws the framing off too, because you don't know how to frame the house either when you get overscaled plants like that. The other thing is allow for mature growth. These are 2 hemlocks planted up against the house, and hemlocks get 20 to 30 feet tall. And I know they looked okay right now, but they're, I mean, the one looks like it's a foot from the house. And it's really going to start rubbing against the siding, which is going to cause damage to the siding. And basically, what are you going to do when it starts hitting the gutters? You're going to have to remove the tree. So really think about the plant size when you plant something next to the house and how big it's going to get. I think we have another slide coming up here.
The hemlocks are things that can be trimmed. I know the Arboretum has a nice example of how they've hedged them, but they still have a lot more room than what this has. There is a question, Eric, from somebody about, can you trim arborvitae?
Yes, you can, but again, you have to trim them as they're small. If you're trying to keep them in scale, you can start trimming them, but there are varieties of arborvitaes that stay small, especially like the rounded ones. I saw one called Het's Midget, which is kind of a dwarf rounded arborvitae. So don't go with the large, you know, woodward arborvitae, which gets 4 to 5 feet. The Het's Midget gets 2 to 3. And there's a couple other varieties too that stay smaller, like Mr. Bowling Ball. That is, as long as you even prune those a little bit when they're younger, you can keep them on the smaller side. But don't let them get up to size and then try to prune them back, because that makes a mistake. On this one, we're looking at really a lot of the same texture. And even the, it looks like those are barberries in the foreground, which normally they're a much brighter purple, but they're faded because probably they're getting too much shade. So they're getting more of a greenish purple. And there's not a lot of variation in form either, because everything's been pruned very manicured to the same kind of look, meatball-like look to it, which it would be nice. And I think the frames coming up here kind of shows you, this is when you're doing the drawing here, how it's going to look, and then go to the next frame. But just by adding some, those look like Carl Forester grasses. Am I right, Kyle, on that?
That's what it looks like.
But just getting a different form to that area will really help kind of loosen the area up a little bit and make it look a little less formal, but adding a little different texture, color with the flower, you know, the seed heads on those grasses. It really helps loosen the area up again, as opposed to that real formal look with all the meatball-like shrubs in there. Okay, some things to think about as far as planting bed size is you got to think about your house and how far the windows are off the ground. Some people like the privacy on their bed. I'm sorry, the privacy from their windows. Other people want to look out. And remembering the mature size of the plants and maintenance as far as you know, what kind of watering needs the plants are going to need and how often. Go to the next one.
Come on. There we go.
Okay, this is just kind of showing the planting beds. And you can kind of see where the old bed was. It's kind of like a camel's hump. But we've kind of stretched that out to be a long, smooth, flowing curve, which is going to work much better. Even for a maintenance aspect, was, it's kind of a pain to mow, when it's like that. And especially, a smaller lot, you probably have a push mower, but you get into the bigger lawns and you have something like that, and it's hard to get your riding lawnmower into those little curves and nooks and crannies.
Even with the push mower, it still adds time. It makes it a
Yeah.
little easier.
Yeah,
And visually it kind of flows better. And then
exactly.
also there's a shot or a slide coming up that talks about overhangs, but this, I didn't realize it earlier, kind of shows it. If you see up at the top of the photo, the overhang of the house,
Yeah.
it sticks out about 2 feet. It looks like down at the bottom, most of that bed is in that area under the overhang, which is kind of a dead zone in
Yeah.
most cases.
Makes it hard for the rain to get to the plants.
Yeah.
And this
You can
shows
see-
where you don't want to you don't want to pull your bed line off of a step or a corner like that. You want to come off the existing curve, which will make it much more flowing. Again, from a maintenance standpoint, to get especially if you had a riding lawnmower, to try to get into that area is very difficult, whereas that other curve makes it so much easier. And it's so much more pleasing of a curve bed line like that when you have it kind of flowing off of the existing curve like that. Next. This one where the yellow line kind of shows it coming off that corner, which doesn't make it look so good. You can, like this one, I think the existing line is coming off the driveway, which is fine. Some people don't want to do that. So you can go, and the next slide, go ahead and switch slides. The next slide shows it where it's coming off the middle of the bed area, which is a little bit more pleasing look to it. Whoops.
Did I jump an extra one there?
A little bit. That's
A little
all right.
trigger happy there.
The chat window keeps popping up and it's, yeah, I have to make sure I click back on the slide and then sometimes it advances.
So basically this one comes off the middle of the walk, and it's a real kind of pleasing curve that kind of comes off and flows into the rest of the design. You could do something like that, or you can do the existing one that goes along the walk. The only thing, when it goes along the walk like that, it looks fairly narrow. So your plant choices are going to be a little bit limited with the size of the bed shape or size there along the bed, along the walk there. I mean, it looks to be like a foot. It's hard to tell, but so you're probably going to be limited to more or less perennials along there as opposed to shrubs. This one, just, you can kind of see it, that corner there for a maintenance standpoint is going to be very difficult, especially if you have an edge where you're edging the bed. When it comes to such a point like that, what's going to happen is that the sod area is going to just dry out, and you're going to end up having it look not so good. You're going to have dry grass there because there's, if you're edging the bed on the one side and you got the driveway on the other, it's just, the heat is just going to dry it out. So it really would be really tough to maintain an area like that, a bed. A better choice would be the next slide, where they pull off the brick and just have it kind of flow into the rest of the bed area. So you don't have that little sharp angle there where it kind of dries out the sod. Again, much easier for mowing, whether you're push mowing or this looks like a little bit bigger lot. Maybe they have a riding lawnmower, easier to mow too, and a more pleasing look to it. Go to the next. Here we get into really small sizes of beds where they, this bed should really realistically be pulled out maybe 4 to 5 feet at least to accommodate the spruce there and the roses, and it's just not enough bed space to even make it look good. So a much wider bed and maybe even a little bit of a curve there would look good, even though you don't need to have the curve. But you got to allow enough bed space for the plants to grow, not only their roots, but their top. If the tops start hanging over the lawn, you start going by with the lawnmower, especially the roses, they're going to scratch you as you go by. Then you're going to start cutting the shrubs back a little bit, and you lose the shape and the form of the shrubs from such a small bed area.
A lot of people think about, oh, well, I don't want to make my bed too large because it's going to be harder to maintain. The inverse is actually true. The larger beds are easier to maintain because the plants can mature to their natural sizes. You're not forcing things into smaller spots. So a lot of people that are newer to gardening or doing it themselves, they love those little 1-2 foot wide planting beds, and they're not realistic for hardly any plants at all, to be perfectly honest.
And we do have a question. What would you do with a small space like this where they have 4-foot beds with a patio on one side and a porch on the other? So I guess it kind of depends on what your overall goal is in that 4-foot bed. If you're looking for screening between the two areas, maybe an ornamental grass. There are some narrower shrubs that might work, but lower perennials and that sort of thing.
You'd want to go with shrubs if you're looking for more screening. You could do like a Hicks yew, which is a real upright yew. There's the upright boxwoods called Green Mountain boxwood. There's also a deciduous plant if you wanted to go to the deciduous route, like alpine currant, which is more of an upright shrub. You could do something like that. And it'll depend a little bit on what your goal is and how you want to define that area a little bit. Oh, we can go to the next one. Again, this is when you're coming down to planting in a planting bed area and figuring out how big your bed is going to be. You have to consider the actual size of the plant. So if it's roughly a 4-foot plant, you're going to allow 2 feet for the plant and then an extra foot going to the house. The only thing this drawing does not show is what's the overhang, because I've had people come in with, they have a 2-foot overhang. If you go out there after a rain and you have a 2-foot overhang, there's usually like 1.5 foot that's very dry. And you really can't plant in that area. So that's going to push it out a little bit further because you can't plant where you're not getting that natural rainfall unless you're constantly going out there and maintaining that. And people a lot of times will not do that. And you're going to end up losing the plants in a situation like that. That's going to make it very harsh for the plants to kind of grow and develop. You can cheat a little bit and get close to that edge because the roots will actually grow out into the soil, but you're still going to have to consider that. Here's a picture that kind of shows the gutter line and where the plants grow. And that's something you really have to consider when you're making the bed areas, how far that your overhang is and how dry it is, especially sometimes you get an angled rain where it's coming a certain direction, and you might be a 2-foot area where you don't get any of that natural rainfall. So it's something to consider when you're making your bed area too, is how big the overhang on the house is. And also the walkways, you're going to have a base under your walkway. So if you're trying to plant in an area that's close to a walkway and close to the house, you got the foundation to consider. But root space is going to be something to consider, and what size plant you're going to be able to use. Maybe a smaller plant with a smaller root system is going to be what you're going to need because of certain conditions, like having a walkway and a narrow space to plant. You can't try to stick a shrub in there that has a much bigger root system to it.
Last frost date is usually late May is traditional last frost date.
Okay. We did have a question about cicadas. Somebody had newly planted a multi-stem crab this past fall. Do they need to be concerned about cicadas in the spring?
I didn't think this year was the big cicada release. The biggest thing with smaller shrubs and trees is they come up and they'll basically insert their eggs into the branch that may weaken them a little bit. And I guess everyone's area is a little bit different as far as how many cicadas they have in their yard. You could see more damage from it, but a lot of times the damage isn't severe enough where a little bit of pruning might clean up some of the damage, and then the plants will overcome some of the damage too and overgrow it and clean it and heal themselves too. So I don't know if it's a huge concern unless you're seeing a real big cicada outbreak where you might have to even cover them. They do sell like nettings that you can put over it, but 2024, someone, thank you for whoever posted that, is the next big cicada outbreak. So I don't think this year is the big one. So 2024 might be a little bit more of a concern, especially if you live in an older area.
And with
Okay.
cicadas, that is a big one. Is you know, if you're in a newer subdivision that's been built within the last 17 years, you're really probably not going to see much in the way of cicadas, because all that soil where they've been living is all disturbed and all gone. So
Yeah.
There's also a question about what are some plants with smaller root systems?
Well, I think you're going to be looking at either dwarf shrubs or actually perennials probably would be the best for real small areas like that. So I guess it depends on how big of an area it really is. But if you're looking like a foot area, I don't think you're going to find too many shrubs that'll fit into an area like that besides annuals and perennials.
And if it tends to be a really dry area, we do have some perennial sedums and hens and chicks, things like that, that like it on the dry side. So they would actually thrive there. Okay, you want to go to favorite plants? Or you want to?
Well, I'll just say what the backyard, I know with my backyard, I don't really, I'm more of a collector type plant. So mine's a little bit more of a collection of the different plants I like. My front yard's a little bit more formal, and you know, I've thought about the design a little bit more, but the backyard is more functional as far as what you're going to be using it for. You know, activities, where's your grill going to be at? And you know, are you a collector of plants? You know, so the backyard is a little bit more personal, even though I think there needs to be some thought in it, but maybe not quite as much as what the front yard is, where a lot of more people view it from. We can go to the next one. I think what we did was we threw in a few of our favorite plants, and two of mine are, first of all, my first one is the gold mop chamaecyparis. You can see the picture on the right is one that's kind of been left normal. They can get pretty good size and fairly upright, but the one on the left, if you just prune the little tips out at the top, maybe just a few each year, you can keep it fairly low and mound it. We have several at the nursery that we keep almost as a real kind of informal hedge, which is what the one in the top left looks like at the nursery. And they really maintain a nice shape, and they keep that color all winter, which is fantastic color, which gives you a real good focal point even in the winter time. The next slide is, this is oak leaf hydrangea. I happen to carry, I think, 5 different varieties. There's some really from all different sizes. The smaller one being the peewee and the munchkin, and then it goes to ruby slippers, and I'm forgetting one here. Oh, snow Alice is a little bit larger one. So the Alice hydrangea is going to be in that maybe 6 to 7 foot range, but they have the really nice foliage color in the fall. They also have kind of a whitish flower in the spring, and they have that really coarse texture to it, which really adds something to the landscape. What was your question? I saw question pop up on.
Will we be doing a pruning webinar?
I don't have anything planned, but that's a good idea. So
thanks, Diane.
Schedule. Thanks, Diane.
Okay, next.
Michael.
Oh, I like I like corabels, and I know we had somebody ask about them earlier in the presentation. That's the mapley heart-shaped leaf. That's the purpley leaf in this picture. You know, Palace purple is a standard, but there's a whole bunch of different varieties of colors that you can get with them, and they stay really low, and some of the hardiest varieties actually tend to keep their leaves up through the winter time, although when you get 2 feet of snow, you're not going to see them anyway. But I've had a lot of good success with them in my yard in previous experiences. They pair well with a lot of different things.
They even work good in containers.
They do. And then my other favorite that I love to use is the serviceberry, this probably is more of a framing plant for people for most yards, as they tend to be 15 or more feet tall. But I also like that I can get a snack off of them in June too. Tastes like blueberries.
Okay.
We had a couple questions just pop in. The coral bells, are they semi-evergreen?
They are semi-evergreen. And did I see a question about rabbits?
Yeah, rabbits.
Yes.
I
I haven't noticed too much.
They are fairly rabbit resistant. However, rabbits don't always read the list.
They don't pay attention to what they're not supposed to eat. They eat what they want. But generally speaking, they're pretty left alone. Service berries have multiple seasonal interest. You got the white flowers in spring, and the color change in fall to nice reds, or sometimes a mix of colors in the fall.
Can you go
Whenever-
back to your coral bell page?
Yes.
There's a question on the grass and the specific variety of the fern and the heuchera coral bell.
The fern would be a Japanese painted fern, Anthurium pictum. The grass is the variegated Hakone or Hakonakloa grass. And the specific coral bell
We thought maybe it was Georgia peach.
could be, because on the monitor at work, it didn't look quite as bright pink as it does on my screen right now. Some of them do a color change throughout the year. Colder temperatures bring out different tones in them. So I honestly don't know the specific one right off the top of my head.
Well, there's a rainbow of colors for coral.
Yes.
I had two specific service berry questions. How long do they take to grow? And are there any varieties that are less prone to putting off suckers? And I also have
So service berries, the shad blow is probably, and regent are probably going to be the most prone to doing the offshoots, the suckers. But the more upright varieties, apple service berry, it's autumn brilliance, right, Eric? That's the one we carry most often. We have them planted on the property, and I have not had any suckers from them at all, to be perfectly honest. So from our experience anyway, growing them here on the property, those ones don't do much in the way of suckering. They are not especially fast growing trees. You're looking at the most maybe a foot in a year, but probably a bit less than that, more in the 8-inch range, something like that. And the berries ripen in June, if you were wondering. And the birds also eat them, and they draws a lot of birds to your yard.
There's also a real upright one called Standing Ovation.
Oh, yes.
If you're looking for a narrow one for screening, it's a good choice.
Yeah, we have one of those planted on the property here in Aurora as well, if you want to see one that's been growing for a while.
Do you have, moving on to the next question, do you have any suggestions for shady areas under maple trees?
Lamium or other perennial ground covers might be good, just so they're not competing as much. Things that can handle a little bit drier. Vinca sometimes will work good, or Pachysandra. I know under the large autumn blaze at the farm, it's starting to kind of shade out and dry out under it. So even the Pachysandra has started to retreat a little bit, just because it's gotten so dry. So that,
yeah, the tree provides shade, and it soaks up a lot of the moisture that gets in the ground. So it makes it a especially competitive environment when they get even larger.
okay, so then one of my favorites is Calamantha montrose white, which is kind of the frothy plant in the foreground. It just blooms and blooms. It starts in June and goes all the way through October. Just a great plant for full sun, 18 to 24 inches tall, makes a nice kind of mound on its own. These are planted closer together, so you don't actually see the mounded shape. And then the next one, which pairs really well with it, is allium, the ornamental onions. Summer Beauty is one of the older cultivars, which came out maybe 10 to maybe 15 years ago, but now we have Millennium, Summer Peekaboo, which is shorter, Lavender Lollipop. So there's a whole range, and you could just do a little mixed assortment of the different alliums, but very low maintenance, full sun. They handle fairly drained soil, almost semi-evergreen foliage, but very low maintenance, easy to take care of.
and rabbit resistant because
Oh, yes, rabbits.
they don't like
usually
the
don't like
onion taste
onion.
so much.
Yeah,
So Cynthia had
Specifically Carex pennsylvanica underneath the maple.
actually, that would probably work because Carex pennsylvanica would typically be found under oak trees in their native habitat. The maple trees may tend to be a little bit drier, so if we're in the middle of a drought, you may want to do a little supplemental watering, even after they're established.
would ginger work under a maple tree?
You could do ginger, but I've had it under mature spruce trees where when it gets dry, it completely collapses to the ground. So you do have to watch for supplemental watering needs because in periods of drought, ginger can collapse to the ground, but it does bounce right back if you water it in time.
Is there a particular allium? So Nalini, it said that her allium kind of took over. Is there a particular allium that would not be as invasive or
I believe I've
aggressive?
heard that Millennium was one that tends to drop seed. The Summer Beauty and Summer Peekaboo were ones that were supposed to be more sterile. So that's something, if you leave the seeds up or the flower structures up once it's done blooming, that does allow for the seed to develop on those that are actually having viable seed. So if you trimmed them back after blooming, if it's one that does reseed, that would take care of it. Did you want me to open it up for questions?
Yeah, if you go, we're gonna unmute everybody if you just want to, if you want to pop in with your questions. Although Mary Colleen had another question about evergreen ground cover for west facing and for east facing.
Evergreen west facing.
Some of the dwarf junipers would work.
Oh, those would work well. We do have some sedums that aren't quite totally evergreen. I'm assuming the west side is fairly dry and sunny, but I might just be putting that in my mind. On the east side, lamiums would work well, vinca, pachysandra, as well as others, ginger.
All right, does anybody have any other questions?
Yes, I have a question about what would be a good replacement for a dying Fothergilla?
You're looking for a shrub option then?
Yes.
Well, there's some of the Deutzias. I have one called Chardonnay Pearls. There's also one Yuki Cherry, which is a nice small little shrub that could work in a spot like that.
The small white Gilas, maybe, Eric?
Yeah, how much sun is it getting?
It gets full sun.
Oh, and some of the Weigelias, there's one called Spilled Wine and Minuet would work, and My Monet Weigelias would be a few Weigelia choices that would work in a spot like that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yep.
We had a question about hydrangeas that don't flower. She doesn't cut them back in the fall, and she covers them with mulch in the fall.
Yeah, some of the macrophylla hydrangeas were especially the older varieties were not very consistent with flowering. They flower on the old wood, and what's happening is a lot of times they'll die out over the winter. We simply do not have, well, this year we do. The snow cover is helping those.
Yeah, we do.
So we might have a good year for some of the hydrangeas.
Can I ask that if you have your background noise on that you mute yourself?
So yeah, some of the hydrangeas, the newer ones that are coming out, I did plant one of the new summer crush that we got in last year, was planted a year ago, and this past year it bloomed very well. So I'm kind of anxious again to see how that one does again. But it's supposed to be a rebloomer, and there's a few that are coming onto the market that not only are supposedly rebloomers, but they also bloom up and down the stem, not just on the top of the stem. So I'm kind of curious to try some of those and maybe start bringing some of those in.
And then, is it Nalini had a question?
Yes, I do. there was, one of the slides before the oak leaf hydrangea, and I just wanted to know the name.
Was it the yellow?
That was the
Yes, yes.
Oh,
Chamaecyparis mops. It was a false cypress called mops.
Okay, false cypress called mops.
Yep.
Yeah. If you just ask for mops, people will know what it is.
Okay, and then the other question was very similar to one that you just answered. I have about 9 hydrangeas or maybe 11, which have not really bloomed. And I have, I often come to your place, and I was told one time to cut them all the way down. So I did. The next year they didn't, but then all of a sudden, one year they all bloomed beautifully. And then the last 3 years they haven't bloomed. Should I just take them out? They're all microphyllus and they are old ones.
Yeah, if they're the older varieties, you probably would want to try some of the newer varieties.
Okay.
And you don't want to cut them back, but they do like some fertilizer in the spring too. So it wouldn't be a bad thing to fertilize them in the spring. And the time to prune those is after they start leafing out in the spring. You can kind of see what's dead and what's alive. You obviously don't want to cut off anything alive because that's older wood. Those are where your first set of blooms will come from. Hopefully this winter with all the snow cover, they're gonna have a little bit more older stems that survive the winter, which our flowering may come a little bit sooner. So maybe try them this year and see with all this snow cover. It really came at a good time this year because we got cold after we had already gotten that good amount of snow. So that snow is helping to insulate the plants. And the other good thing is it's going to help keep them kind of insulated and dormant longer. So if we do get a real warm spell, they won't actually start to grow as quickly because we do have the snow cover that's kind of insulating them.
So I did actually fertilize them with Sapoma the last 3 years.
No,
Should I continue?
What were you using?
I can't.
I'm sorry.
What were you using to fertilize?
I think it was Sapoma. I bought it at
the Espoma? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be good. I typically don't like using the real hard fertilizer like the Miracle Grow. But I guess if you used it just once in the spring, it would be fine. But people tend to use it throughout the year, and that's not a good thing for shrubs, especially the hydrangeas. But a real good, well-balanced fertilizer can be used. We have some that are called like the plant tones, and there's also the liquid ones too that we sell, the bloom and stuff. If you put those on for maybe the first couple months in the spring, and then kind of drop off after that, it should be enough to get them going. You try to get them growing faster is what basically the fertilizer does. So they'll start reblooming again.
Yeah, the one that I used was the bloom from your place. Yes. Okay, thank you.
There is a question about how to stop deer from eating arborvitae.
A fence is probably the only thing that's going to stop.
About all you can do, right?
You can use some deterrents and stuff, but there is one arborvitae that is resistant. So if you do have a deer problem, the Great Western arborvitae, I have one called Green Giant, which they do not like. And I've actually seen this, a customer put some in that backs up to the forest preserve that they have a lot of deer, and they put in a hedge of the Green Giant, and they look fantastic. The deer have left them alone. So if you do back up to an area that has a lot of deer pressure, is go with the Great Western arborvitae as opposed to the Occidentalis, like the Techni or the Emerald Green arborvitaes. Those were going to be food for them. So especially in a year like this year, they're looking for alternative food sources because of the snow cover.
And then we've got
There's two
more hydrangea questions. One is a quick fire that's 3 years old that, oops, my chat just slid down. 3-year quick fire hydrangea that has gotten leggy and stopped growing, almost looks sick. Any ideas?
I guess it might depend a little bit on the area that it's growing in. If it's not growing as well, is there a lot of root competition? Is it getting too much shade? You can prune those back pretty severely. If it's let's say it's 5 feet tall, if you go back to maybe 3 feet, maybe make uneven cuts so it doesn't look like it's been pruned, but they do handle pruning quite well, and they will flower the same year, or they should flower. The only reasons I can think of that they wouldn't be flowering is possibly that they're planted in too much shade, or there's a real, root competition where they're, the soil just gets so dried out that they just don't grow as well. Those would be the two things to look for.
And then with a tardiva hydrangea tree form, having trouble growing other plants under it, any suggestions?
Well, maybe using either a ground cover or maybe more creeping plants that would help, that would, you plant a little bit away from them and let them creep into that area, depending on how much sun or shade you have. But you could, plant something a little bit away and help, more or less creep into the area, as opposed to planting right underneath it. That, yeah, it could be a little bit drier underneath it.
I have a question, if you can hear me.
Yes.
I purchased some Miracle Grow that appeared to be specially designed for hydrangeas, but you made a comment you weren't really high on Miracle Grow.
They're just very high nitrogen. And, a lot of Miracle Grows, I think, are more or less for container plants that really want that real large boost of nitrogen, or annuals that you're trying to grow for one season. Shrubs are not quite that nitrogen hungry. So that's why I say be a little bit lenient on, if you're using Miracle Grow, maybe only do it once in the early spring. But it's a very high nitrogen content, and you don't want to keep pushing the plants too late into the season. So I tend to use or suggest more or less a balanced fertilizer, even numbers and not quite as high nitrogen.
Yeah, that's interesting. The container for Miracle Grow says use it every 2 weeks.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Well, Miracle Grow is really good at selling product, and if you use more, you buy more. So they've got that figured out pretty well.
They sure do. Thank you.
Yeah.
Diane had a question about her soil. She got it tested and it has a higher pH and very low nitrogen, fairly low potassium. Is there a general fertilizer, or is it kind of more plant specific?
I think it can be both, but I would probably, our plant tones are, have a lot of the nutrients in them, which you wanted a well-balanced fertilizer that even has some of the micronutrients in it, which is what espoma has in it. It even has some of the bacterias and funguses that normally are in the soil in high numbers, but can be depleted in some of our soils in our area. So I think it would be a good thing to use some of the, like a well-balanced fertilizer. And also, the high pH is really typical of our soils around here anyways. And I think you can ask maybe for some suggestions if it's a real high pH of what plants you're putting there, because there are some plants that do prefer it a little more acidic soil. So, your plant selection, yes, can be, benefit from what your soil is. And you can also add some nutrition to the soil by just adding not only like the espoma products, but also organic material. Amending the soil a little bit too is also going to help.
Very much so. If you do your own compost and stuff like that, that's going to help with your nitrogen as well.
Eric,
Yes.
can you hear me? It's Marcia.
Yes.
Also, I was thinking about the high pH. I mean, where is this bed? Could it have like gravel mulch? Is it between foundation and sidewalk maybe, where the pH would be naturally higher?
Yeah, that's something to consider, is the area that, it is. But, a lot of, even some houses where they've done, it's new construction where they, I'm sure you've seen this, they dump a pile of gravel out in the front yard and they use maybe 3/4 of it, and the rest they kind of smear out and put gravel underneath it, or a topsoil on top of it just to hide it. And, when they grade out the yard, but then you plant a tree there and you start having, chlorotic leaves from the tree, which is in effect from, what happened there when the house was constructed and they left the gravel out in the front yard or whatever. So you don't really know what was there unless you really start digging around in your front yard and you find gravel areas or But our soils typically in this area are very alkaline to begin with. So it is something that we have to deal with on an individual plant basis and what we're planting there. And you can amend the soil a little bit, but it's very difficult to get it back to a higher pH.
Diane had another question about maple trees and if they drain the soil of nutrients and if you need to balance that.
No, maple trees are pretty tough plants. You don't have to really necessarily do much, but they do dry the soil out very, very much so. You know, the root competition, they tend to be, I would say, a little bit, and that has to do somewhat with our soils being more compacted. Roots are going to grow more towards the surface. So those feeder roots are going to really dry out the soil, and they do draw, yes, some nutrients out of the soil. So if you have plants in the area, they can be affected by the roots of the maple tree. But maple trees are pretty aggressive as far as the root systems go, and they will find what they need from the surrounding soil.
Nalini, balanced fertilizer is just something, if you look at any fertilizer, it has 3 numbers on the side of the bag. And you want them to be somewhat in the same neighborhood. And we're big proponents of the Espoma line and just organic soil or organic fertilizers in general. And they're going to be all those lower numbers. So anything that's in a single digit is going to be more of an organic fertilizer. When you're buying the Miracle Grows and things like that, that's when you're going to start seeing 10s to 20s to sometimes 30s in some of those NPK numbers, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So that's what when we use the term balanced fertilizer, generally it's mostly we're just referring to using something even and in at least in the same neighborhoods as the other ones. So.
Does anybody have any other questions? If not, it was really fun to do this, although you guys did all the work. I'm just back here reading the chats. I did want
You're welcome, Becca.
Yeah, thank you. I did want to mention that our landscape design appointments this year are going to be virtual. And they're pretty good value. You get, and all the information is available on our website if you wanted to have somebody look at your a view or an area. And it's just thegrowingplace.com/landscape-design, or you could, there's a navigation under
The tab, the services tab on the Growing Place.
Yeah. But again, thank you to everybody, and if you have any feedback, let us know.
Okay,
Thanks
thank
for
you,
watching.
everyone.
Thanks.